Hello, my name is Jeanette Castilla, and I will be presenting the role of L1 in second language acquisition. When a classroom exhibits L1 and L2 usage, they participate in the diagnostic view of a language acquisition classroom. Within this model, students and teachers follow describable criteria in selecting the L1 or L2 during classroom interactions. Criteria for selecting the choice of language may not be verbalized by the instructor. Although there is concurrent use of L1 and L2, concurrent use does not imply randomness. Rather, it means that distinct motivations drive language choice. It also means that linguistic constraints operate alongside social ones. In the past, many researchers believe that the L2 acquisition classroom should possess a no first language policy. Proponents of this policy believe that success with L2 is strongly determined by maximum exposure to acquired language. Thus, L1 should be banned. They also believe that L1 intervenes with the process of L2 acquisition. This is referred to as negative transfer. This negative transfer is a result of the learner becoming dependent on the L1. The result is in the learner not even trying to understand meaning from context and explanation. And the learner may not express themselves with their limited command of the targeted language. Another reason against the use of L1 in L2 acquisition is that it leads to fossilization. This is the phenomenon by which L2 learners often stop learning, even though they might be far short of native life competence. This term is also used for specific linguistic structures which remain incorrect for lengthy periods of time in spite of plentiful input. For example, immigrant speakers whose fluent L2 still contain non-target-like structures. There are many benefits of L1 in second language acquisition, and recent research has proven this. Recent research states that positive transfer, or that L1 has a great impact on L2 acquisition. Noam Chomsky's universal grammar theory upholds this positive transfer. Chomsky and other linguists like him have shown that the 5,000 to 6,000 languages in the world, despite the very different grammars, do share a set of syntactic rules and principles. These linguists believe that this universal grammar is innate and is embedded somewhere in the circuitry of the human brain. The concept of the universal grammar theory can be seen in the example of English and Chinese. In both of these languages, there are 5 similar ways to form words. They are compound, conversion, affixation, sound changing, and abbreviation. This universal grammar theory, exemplified in English and Chinese, proves that that L1 can indeed help the acquisition of L2. If an English learner were learning Chinese, they would be able to understand the similar ways to form words, and vice versa from Chinese to English. Additional benefits of L1 in second language acquisition state that when given the opportunity to use L1, such as code switching and translanguaging in meaningful ways, bilingual learners increase their comprehension and understanding of the text. Additionally, L1 provide bilingual students with positive individual and cultural identities. L1 also gives value to the bilingual student's native language and reduces learners' anxiety. Self-talk is also a benefit of L1. Self-talk occurs in L1. This is the process of mediating and redirecting one's own activity. During the process of self-talk, when learners are using the L1, they are practicing in self-help strategies. Meta-talk is also an additional benefit to the use of L1. When a language learner asks questions, expresses their needs, or expresses linguistic gaps that they need help in, these also occur in L1. As a result, the L1 becomes the voice of the expert. The issue of quantity of use becomes very important with L1 and L2 practices. In the past, researchers have urged the restriction of L1 in foreign language classroom settings. Overall, researchers had dissatisfaction with the low rate of L2 produced by teachers. Instead of using L1, teachers were asked to adjust the L2 to match the student's level of comprehension. This was known as input modification. There are many concerns with input modification. These concerns are that the L2 learner may not be receiving meaningful L2 content. The assumption that very low levels of L1 use will lead to better L2 with regards to students is also flawed. Studies have suggested that even when not resorting to their L1, students still manage to evade meaningful second language use. There is also the principle of balance when considering quantity of use. The principle of balance states that learners that use complex L1 conversations in what was to be held in the target language were more likely to use equally complex L2. Learners who use simple and short L1 conversations were more likely to converse in short and simple L2 utterances. This suggests that allowing students to partake in meaningful L1 conversations on L2 requirements yields more and meaningful L2 utterances. Another important factor is to consider the function of L1. Students are more willing to take risk with pedagogical functions, that is, language functions and practice. They desire less ambiguity for real functions, such as giving instructions or feedback, and will use L1. As a result of this, L1 may intrude as it becomes a vehicle for real communication. Although the quantity of use is important to consider, and more research is required in determining the proportion of L1 to L2 in second language acquisition classrooms, it is more important to consider how a teacher uses the L1 or L2 to connect with students. When should L1 be used? Recent research has suggested that L1 be used during task-based language teaching. This increases the understanding of concepts. L1 should also be used in practicing complex academic terms, expressions, and phrases. It should also be used with students that have a lower level proficiency in the L2. It is also helpful in defining new vocabulary terms and in grammar teaching, since there is a lack of cognates for grammar terms in English. Additional facts regarding L1. Recent research has shown that the majority of students favor the use of L1. There are also gender and level of graduation from previous schools considerations. More females favor using L1. Students who were considered lower level students also require more L1 input in order to experience success with the L2. Past experience with the second language also plays a huge factor. Difference between the mother tongue and the target language also needs to be considered when using L1. Topics for further research. As mentioned before, the proportion of L1 to L2 usage still demands more research. Additionally, L1 use in multicultural classrooms, where there is more than one native language present, also requires more research.